And thank you all for coming. I'm Catherine, and Abigail's also here. We will be presenting, and we are so excited to share this to you. This topic really means a lot to us, and it really hits close to home. So we're excited to share that from you, and for you to learn from what we've learned in researching and our presenters. So to start, we just wanted to quote Malala. To all the girls who have faced injustice and silence, together we'll be heard. Together, we will work together to improve our world. I think that's what this quote really encapsulates, and that's what we want to share with you today. So, our presentation is called The Domestic Burden on Girls and Its Impact on Their Education. Like I had said, this really hits close to home for me and Abby, so we are so excited to share that with you. We have wonderful speakers today, and I will let Abby introduce them and ourselves.
So first, a little bit about me and Catherine. Me and Catherine are both part of the class of 2024 at Mater Dei Prep. We are both youth representatives for Pathways to Peace. We are both volunteers with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. And if you can see on this slide, there's both of our names and our emails if you do wish to contact us about anything regarding this presentation or anything else.
And Tez, if you'd like to say anything.
Oh, thank you so much, Catherine. Catherine and Abigail, I'm just so honored and delighted to be a part of your event today. You are so good at representing Pathways to Peace, and you are next generation peace leaders. So Pathways to Peace is just honored to be presenting this CSW 66 program, which is about the domestic burden of girls on their education. And so Pathways to Peace, just let me kind of share a little bit about Pathways to Peace, is a UN designated peace messenger organization. It holds consultative status with the Department of Global Communications as well as ECOSOC. For the last 40 years, Pathways to Peace has been engaged in innovation, collaboration, and movement building. Our vision at Pathways to Peace is a world at peace, and our work is about building a culture of peace. Pathways to Peace provides education, consultation, and mentorship. Through the years, Pathways has helped inaugurate several UN-recognized global peace initiatives, including the United Nations International Day of Peace, which is held annually on September 21st, with millions of people coming together to celebrate, put aside their differences, and to honor peace. We also inaugurated the UN Culture of Peace Resolution and the Peace Wave, which is a way to make Peace Day every day by pausing for just a moment at noon to envision peace. Pathways to Peace provides education, consultation, and mentorship, as I said. And so we work in partnership always with peace builders locally and globally on programs that include nuclear disarmament, climate change, racial equity, and gender equality. In addition to our regular programming, on March 8th, International Women's Day, we took another step to honor women by launching our Exceptional Women of Peace award program. Kimberly Weichel is the project lead on that. She's one of the speakers today. And we are looking for recipients of 2 awards. One, an Exceptional Woman of Peace. The second, an Exceptional Young Woman of Peace. So I will put the Pathways to Peace website in the chat. If you'd like to nominate, you can nominate online. It's easy, and we'd love to see your nominees. And now it's just important to recognize and acknowledge our direct connection to Matter Day Prep and the Global Leaders Institute. Your two event organizers today are part of Matter Day Prep and the Global Leaders Institute. And that institute is headed by Mr. George Anthony, who is also with us. Mr. Anthony is a Pathways to Peace primary representative to the UN, and he mentors and empowers middle school and high school students to become peace builders. And they also then have the opportunity to represent Pathways to Peace at the UN. And now it is my honor and delight to turn the floor over to Cathrine and Abigail, who are high school students at Matter Day Prep and in the Global Leaders Institute, headed by Mr. George Anthony. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tez. And
Thank you, Tez.
let me just say, we are so grateful for you, Mr. Anthony, and all the opportunities that you guys and Pathways to Peace have given us. With that, we are so excited to first introduce our speakers, Marlenis Rosa, who we've worked with now for about 2 years and has become a good friend of ours, who is a family service specialist here in New Jersey. Kimberly Wischel, who is a teacher at the Lifelong Learning Institute at American University. Mary Morange, who is a fifth-year college student at Jordan Court and is studying to become a social worker. And of course, Tezekiah Gabriel, the fantastic executive director of Pathways to Peace. So I'll turn it over to Abby to give you an overview.
All right, thank you. A little bit of an overview about our presentation. The pandemic and natural disasters have forced older children, particularly the daughters, to take on the domestic and/or financial labor of their families. This is compelling many girls to prioritize family or work instead of school. We're going to be talking about the long-term social and economic impact and what can be done to support women impacted by this burden in school and in the job market.
So as we've mentioned, and that's in our presentation title, there's a burden placed on girls. So first we wanted to explain to you what this burden is, because that's a bit vague, isn't it? Just the term burden. So really what we're talking about is at the height of the pandemic, thousands of adults were laid off from work. So we all know someone, family, friend, ourselves, who were laid off of work or could not continue because of the pandemic. So this resulted in many teenagers taking on more shifts at places like restaurants, fast food shops, etc., to compensate for this loss of wages. In fact, I know some teenagers who were making more than their parents at some points, especially when you go into the children of essential workers who were separated from their parents due to safety reasons. They had to, protect each other. I in fact know one of my friends who stayed with their grandparents the entirety of their pandemic because their parents work at a hospital. And especially for them, as the older children, they had to step up and become an extra parent to those siblings. So it's really the domestic burden of having to take care of themselves and their siblings without their parents often, which cooking, cleaning, helping with homework, to an extent where it's not just the normal, like, oh, whatever, help your sibling with your homework because, good older sister type thing. But it's really an all-consuming feeling of having to take care of them. And especially when natural disasters strike, both myself and Abby, we live in New Jersey. Hurricane Sandy was years ago, but it's still, some families are being so affected today. They lose economic stability and lose their childcare options, resulting in the older siblings, especially the daughters, having to stay home and take care of them. I can recall that a family friend of mine, them and their kids coming to stay with us for a week after Sandy because their entire house was destroyed. And even without these disasters, many oldest children feel like they must help out to take off the stress of their parents. It's kind of like if you've ever heard, oh, you have an oldest kid, a built-in babysitter. It's that expectation to help and provide for your family. And with that, as we've mentioned, it's on the daughters. It's, of course, there's pressure on the sons, but we wanted to really emphasize why there's this burden on the daughters. So due to the cultural and social expectation of 100,000 of years, women and girls are expected to take care of the home and the family. We always have been. The stereotype that girls are more caring, empathetic, and nurturing than their male counterparts drives them to take on these roles. I'm one of 3 girls, so I can't really speak on what it's like to have brothers, but I know my friends who are perhaps the second oldest child, their older sibling is a brother, feels like they have to take on more because they're the girls. They may have to do more chores, more cooking, because their brother can go do whatever they want. There tends to be a higher expectation on girls to take care of their family, both in the nuclear family and just in society as a whole. Women and girls are expected to be more mature and listen. We grow up faster. We've all heard that. Girls grow up faster while boys are allowed to misbehave and, boys will be boys. It's this cultural and social expectation of the past, how many years? Thousands, maybe? That us girls are supposed to be mature and listen and be better at cooking, cleaning, helping out around the home, whereas boys are expected to make mistakes, mess around, and aren't as pressured to take on the role of caring for their families.
How it affects education. Girls tend to have higher priorities where education takes on a secondary role. When you're taking care of your parents and siblings, school can seem insignificant and fall to the wayside. With added responsibilities comes added stress and often poor mental health, and many cannot participate during regular class times or physically attend classes. This causes school to be more difficult to pay attention in, and let alone succeed. In 2019, 60% of men and 69.3% of women were enrolled in college. In 2020, it decreased to 59% of men and 66% of women. While there is a higher percentage of women at both points, it is important to point out that during the pandemic, there was a 1% drop in men versus a 3% drop in the number of women attending college. Impact on individual futures. Girls need to complete higher education so that they can produce a higher income. Without higher education, women end up working minimum wage jobs and are more at risk in the aspect of job security. This all can lead to financial abuse, whether it be from family members, their spouses, possibly even their children, or cousins or friends. And it also continues the cycle of women needing to step down from their future to take care of their families.
Women not getting educated also has an impact on our national and global future. We all have seen time and time again, I'd hope we see, how much of an impact women can have, especially when they're educated. Due to less women having high access to higher education, we have less women in fields like STEM, government, policymaking, and peace building, in these fields that really change our world and how our world is built. When women have less financial freedom, the world GDP actually goes down and is negatively impacted. As we can see here, I just want to put up some amazing women who are changing our world. We have Kamala Harris, who is the Vice President of the United States, Jane Goodall, who is a primatologist and anthropologist, Sonia Segal, who is the CEO of Gap, which, if anyone does not know, Gap is a major clothing store, especially here in the US. And then we have Ada Alimari, who is a pharmaceutical chemist, nano engineer, and inventor who is doing amazing things with NASA in that picture. And just in general, all of these women are changing our world, and they are able to do that because they were able to get an education. Educating women changes our world in more ways than we can possibly imagine. We also need to discuss women's economic impact on the world. Abby?
Young women have the highest spending power of any demographic. Spending power is the ability to spend money, just in case no one knew what that meant. By reducing their earning ability, it decreases their spending ability. Female CEOs only make up 8.2% of Fortune 500 companies. When more women work, the economy expands. And when people spend less, the global economy decreases. Catherine, you're on mute. I did the same thing. It's
I'm
okay.
so sorry. Zoom, right? As Abby mentioned before, only 8.2% of women are CEOs out of the Fortune 500 companies. Out of 500 companies, there are only 41 female CEOs. That's insane, especially when you look at how much women spend. Over here, we have the annual consumer spending by women in each region and country. Women have the most spending power. We spend the most on homes, on groceries, on major purchases. And especially when you look into women know what women want, essentially in business. When you have a female CEO or women in charge who decide what a company is selling, when women buy more, oftentimes that company is able to get more sales. And when that happens on a global scale, we see the global GDP increase, which of course is always a good thing.
Why we need to pay attention. "65% of jobs require higher education. Many women will face poverty and may have to rely on their future children to help pay the bills and put food on the table. And many may be forced to take care of elderly family members well into their adult lives, as elderly care is out of the question for many, as the cost is astronomical."
So, what can be done? We've talked about all this pressure that girls face and how that results in our individual, national, and global futures. So, what are some solutions? So, a major one is affordable childcare to low income families. Now, this can help those families, A, go to work more so the women don't have to stay home and take care of the children, and B, help educate the children. When we have, oftentimes you'll see in daycare and stuff that early learning education really impacts kids for the rest of their lives. Another solution is on-campus childcare. As you can see here, we have University of Washington has in the US has on-campus daycare, and this allows parents, both young parents, teen moms, dads, and parents who want to get a college degree to drop their kids off there and go to college. It is also is great for the colleges because they can have education majors and stuff go in and learn how to interact with kids. Also providing a lower cost and more flexible education. Essentially, as you see, any way that we can educate people, especially girls, improves our world. By allowing students to take classes online or at different scheduled times, they can take care of both their families and their studies. You can't just say, oh, prioritize your studies over your family, because that is not realistic. That is not realistic financially and emotionally. So what needs to be done is creating a way where students don't have to prioritize, where we can go to school, get an education, but also take care of our family at home. So I want to add in, this is from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, the percent of girls enrolled in education. So this would be wherever these places consider primary to required education. So in the US, our required education is from ages 5 to 17. So in North America, 99.7% is enrolled. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 61.6% of students are enrolled. In the European Union, it's 81.3. Middle East and North Africa is 41.3. South Asia is 25.9. East Asia and Pacific 52.6, sub-Saharan Africa is only 8.2% of girls. Not even 10% of girls who are eligible for education are enrolled. And then Australia is outdoing us all with over 100% of girls, which essentially means that girls are going on to higher education as well. That statistic can be confusing, trust me. But as we see here, there are not enough girls getting educated, especially in lower developed countries. So if we're able to provide education for those girls, we will see an increase on the whole in the world economy and in innovation. We know when girls are educated, we get innovation as a result. So before we close this, I also want to share, me and Abby want to share our own experiences. I myself, I think I mentioned before, I have 2 younger siblings. So especially before the pandemic, I felt a need to take care of them, to, watch out for them if they're going out on the street, or my parents used to travel a lot for work. So I would take care of them. I would get them on the bus, get them dinner, breakfast, help them out with their homework. So during the pandemic, I actually had an opposite experience than most people, with my parents home more. And that kind of inspired me to make this, because I realized how much less I was doing and how much I had been doing, where I felt pressured to take care of them. And I still do to some extent. But I am very grateful for that, and my siblings, obviously. But it really opened my eyes to how much girls are expected to take on. Abby, if you'd like to share.
Of course, thank you. And also, one thing is that this is not the end of our presentation. This is just the end of the slideshow. We still do have a panel and a few other things. So you don't have to leave and stuff. We still have more. But I'm one of the older cousins in my family. I'm a part of a huge Irish Italian family that's always been very close. Even like before the pandemic, a lot of my cousins always looked up to me. I would hang out with them. I was the one watching over them a lot of the time, as many of my cousins are 5, 6, 7 years younger than me. And with the pandemic, I lost seeing my cousins. I was able to see one of my cousins who lives a few doors down, but that was about it, which it really did take a toll on me, as I was confused, as I didn't know what to do with my time, as I wasn't watching little children. And then after the pandemic, as a lot of my family, we grew distant from each other because we couldn't be together. After the pandemic, I decided to become a dance teacher, and I'm an assistant teacher at my studio, and I'm teaching 3 days a week. With this, I get to help all the little kids, and I get to talk to them and see how they're growing. And it makes me miss my cousins. And it just makes me so happy that I can be a part of a small child's life, and hopefully be a big influence and a good influence on them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Before we completely move on, we do want to show one of our friends who's also a student at Matter Day Prep's perspective. Her family got really impacted during the pandemic, and she ended up having to take on more hours at her job, as we previously mentioned. And I think she has a very important and impactful message to share with us all.
Catherine, the volume.
It costs so many people their jobs. It costs families so much.
I'm sorry, is it working? I'm so sorry, everyone. Is the volume working?
Yes, the volume's now working.
Okay. I'll just replay it then. Sorry. This is Betsy Lima, by the way. She is also a student at Matter Day Prep, and she is also in the Global Leaders Institute. She is an amazing friend and person to work with. I'm so sorry, technical difficulties. How has COVID-19 affected your education and mental health?
Well, for one, no one was really prepared for COVID. it was such an unexpected situation that had happened with everyone, and it cost so many people their jobs and cost families so much stress. And
How did it cause your family stress?
well, for one, we had to pay for food, rent, bills, just to keep a roof over our heads. And plus, my brother was just entering college and we had to pay for his tuition. We also have to pay for my school tuition in order to go here. And that's not even most of what causes the stress, but the fact that me, as the youngest of three siblings, I couldn't do anything about it at the time because I was not old enough to have a job. And it was just really stressful to see my family have to pick up the pace and me not being able to do anything but just do good in school.
So, speaking of school, how did you think all that stress affected your education?
Well, it was not really good doing school over Zoom when you're in a room full of distractions, your own distractions. I don't think it's really the best place to be doing your schoolwork because you don't get anything done. You start failing your classes, and it's just something that you need to progress in months. It takes so long. And then when I finally got to the point of getting my education back on track, we had gone back to school and I had met so many new people. And then I eventually gained new distractions. So it was just all over again.
So, can you talk about some of the distractions and things experienced at home?
Your distractions could be all types of things in your room, literally just sleeping in bed all day, going on your computer, watching TV, going downstairs to go get more food, snacks, just a bunch of things. And especially if there are other people in your house, you just go and talk to them to just turn off your camera, mute yourself. And you didn't really get anything done. And it just caused so much more things piled up on your plate. And
Speaking of having more things piled up, did you feel that you were responsible to do more things at home or accomplish more in school because of the pandemic?
I really could have helped in my household, like with cleaning and doing my own personal things to take care of myself personally. But I'm not sure why I didn't. I was just like a kid I just really couldn't do anything. But finally, I had turned 15 and I got my first job as a busser. And then I was finally able to start paying for my own things. And then eventually I got a second job like 2 weeks right after my first. And then I was finally able to start helping my family pay for a few things or basically all of my necessities so they didn't have another child to take care of. So,
Do you think the stress of working two jobs have affected you in school?
oh, most definitely. I don't work two jobs anymore because I decided that it's best to take a step back and just focus on one job, mainly on my schoolwork, so I can get a better job, a real job, and actually make more money. So, and I haven't thought about it at first, but it definitely takes up your time, especially when you have your job after school. It takes up a whole bunch of your time. You cannot study, you cannot do your homework, or even if so, when you come back and you say you're going to do it when you come back, you're already too tired, you go to sleep, you just get nothing done, and then you have to wake up like earlier in the morning in order to get it done.
Do you think there's any particular lesson or something you can take away from this whole pandemic experience?
One thing that you could take from this is in life, you're never really prepared for anything and everything. So even when situations come up and you aren't prepared, it's going to be easily, and it's not. It's going to be stressful and it's going to take a lot of obstacles to overcome.
Uh, thank you to Betsy for that. Sorry, it got a bit cut off at the end. So how has COVID-19? I'm so sorry. I do want to now turn it over to another speaker we have from Matter Day Prep. Sorry. I do want to turn it over to our next speaker from Matter Day Prep, who is a good friend of mine and Abby's, who is going to talk about her experience, Caroline Wildrick. She's also in the Global Leaders Institute. So if you'll just unmute yourself.
Hello, I am Carolyn Wildrick. As Kat said, I am part of the Global Leaders Institute at Mater Dei Prep. So with COVID, I actually also had an opposite situation. I only have a single mom. I live with my mother. We are very close together. She is a teacher, a middle school teacher. So that takes up a lot of her time to pay for bills, do have necessities, groceries, stuff like that. So it's a lot of, she's got her time for school, and when she comes home, which is sometimes late at night because after school she would have tutoring. And with COVID, that changed everything. She was home all the time. We had so much fun, even though that a lot of stuff was happening outside of the house. We still had a great time together. And COVID was very, very hard on a lot of people, I know. But there's also pros and cons to everything. So when talking about COVID, in my situation, it was really great because I got to connect with my mom again. It wasn't that just I saw her in the morning, I went to school, got on the bus, went to school, had my whole day, and she had her opposite day. It was, we connected, we talked, we spent time together. So I really think that that was good for me.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. We do want to now open the floor before we move on into our speakers. If anyone wants to talk about their own experience or with COVID-19 or their own experience with feeling that domestic burden, we want to hear from all of your experiences. If anyone would like to.
Or you can just unmute and I'll pin you.
Okay.
Can we just say that if you have a question, you can also put it in the chat and we'll pick it up there as well.
Yeah, I have something to say. My name is Florence and I'm living in Canada. I'm joining in from Canada, Winnipeg, actually, and I'm from Nigeria. I visited Nigeria last year during the pandemic, and I got to see how girls were impacted by the pandemic and also, abuse, together with the abuse, domestic violence in the home. And it's profound because before I was just looking at the statistics as they were putting it out there, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, 8% of girls not being in school. And now even with the pandemic, it becomes even worse because now the whole school were shut down and they have to stay home. And it's only the rich that could afford iPad and computers for their kids to go to school. So most of the girls just stay home or completely drop out. And then they have to look for jobs to help sustain the extra mouth. One of the things I also heard from a lot of families was the additional mouth that they now have to feed because the kids are home. A lot of the kids are home doing nothing, just eating, and that puts more stress on the parents, and then more violence increases in the home as a result of the additional stress. And so I found a lot of girls out on the street, a lot of girls just, dropping off completely. I remember I followed up with a particular 2 individuals to see if they did eventually go back to school. And that was just this year, in February. And unfortunately, they have not yet gotten back to school. This is as a result because they are now earning money and they want to help out, but they are young. So I quite agree. I love the discussion, and I'm happy at the fact that you girls took it up. It's not just in New Jersey where you are, but I just want to say that the impact is even more felt hundred over and over in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm hoping that this discussion will shed more light on the true impact and the after effect of what is going to happen to a lot of girls living in that region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really impactful. Would anyone else like to speak before we turn it over to our speakers? Okay. Well,
sorry, Kat. First thing is there is someone in the chat. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your name, and I don't want to butcher it. But they said that the takeaway is that there should be a universal business policies to have days to spend with their family, and to regularize multiple days based on every few months, based on seniority and performance incentives. I think that this is a great idea and that this is very good input. I'm sorry, but thank you for putting that in the chat, and thank you for your input.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now we are going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is Mary Range. She's amazing. I keep saying that, but all of our speakers here are amazing. And as we said earlier, she's a fifth-year student studying to become a social worker. So take it away.
Hello. So thank you for a lovely introduction, Catherine. Like she said, my name is Mary Range. I go to Georgian Court University in Lakewood, not in Georgia, as some people may think, but I am studying to become a social worker. I am currently a social work intern at the New School of Monmouth County, and I have enjoyed every second of it. And what I would like to talk to everybody about today is kind of my experience with the pandemic as a female college student. As Catherine said, I am a fifth-year college student. As most people know, the regular time period to receive your bachelor's degree is 4 years. Some people finish early and some people finish later. I myself am finishing later because of the pandemic. So right when the pandemic began back in March of 2020, it's actually been appearing on my social media memories these past couple of days. Can't believe it's been 2 years ago already. But I was in one of my classes for social work, and we all got the email saying, "Hey guys, please go home." And we were all shocked. And myself as a person, I am a very driven, work hungry person. I am involved in everything on campus. At the time, I was student government vice president, a resident assistant, an orientation leader, and a peer mentor for a women leadership group. And to add on to that, I'm also a first generation college student. So I feel like I'm all this power hungry because I feel like in the back of my mind, like social work type brain, I feel like I have something to prove almost, but I know I don't, but that's besides the point. But when I began, everything had to stop. Like when the pandemic again, for everybody, life came to a halt. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I had always had a schedule following it every single day, and everything had to stop. And I am a daughter of a self-employed plumber and a handicapped mother. So I really I didn't have to pick up the slack, but I've been so blessed through all my years through college. My mom and dad always said, don't work. Like, if you need money, like, we'll give it to you. Don't worry about it. But with the pandemic, I didn't have that option anymore. So in June, I wanted to finish school, the school year without any stress, because I have a learning disability and I didn't want to mess with that and online learning. And so in June, I started working at a local grocery store, and slowly my work hungry like atmosphere came back. I started as a cashier, and I just ended up quitting this past October, and I ended up as the closing night cash manager. So I, as a part-time employee, I was able to grow the ladder very quickly. But like we said earlier, I am a fifth year student. I was supposed to graduate in May of 2021. With the social work curriculum at Georgian Court, your senior year, you are supposed to complete a total of 400 internship hours. With my whole life situation, I was, besides working crazy hours, I was also driving kids home from school that their mom was a nurse, and she was a single mom, and it was just a really hard time for them. And I was like, life's not that bad for me right now. Like, I'll help you guys out. Like, you're an essential worker. Like, I will gladly help you out. I then realized my grades were starting to slip. And my placement for last year was not one that agreed with me 100%. I love working with children, and I love helping them in any way possible. And I was just doing paperwork, and I understand like it was a pandemic, and like there was like things that had to be done, but that just wasn't me. And because of that, I ended up failing my internship class because it just wasn't, we weren't on the same page. So with that, I ended up not being able to graduate last year. And I do believe, I am the type of person to believe that everything happens for a reason. And I do believe that me working all those insane hours and being able to support myself did end up helping me in the end. Because yes, I may not be graduating on time, because I put on time in quotes, because everybody's on their own path. I truly believe that something greater will be waiting for me at the end in May. I hopefully will be working with children in any way possible. My current placement, I am working with some of the cutest kids I've ever met in the entire world, and I would not regret anything. And I do believe that this pandemic, yes, it was such a burden, but it has made me the person I am today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was amazing.
Thank you, Mary.
Throw my vocabulary and positive adjectives, I see. But thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I think it's something that hits home for a lot of people of perhaps they did not have to do all of that stuff that we mentioned, like work, but it definitely affected all of us in some way, shape, or form. And thank you for showing the positive side of your experience as well. So next, we're going to turn it over to our next speaker, Miss Marlenis Rosa. So I'm just going to pin her.
Yes. Hi, everyone. How are you?
Hi, Marlenis.
I'm in the car. I'm actually in the middle of working a case. But like they said, my name is Marlenis Rosa. I'm actually an investigator for an agency in New Jersey. It's called the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. So my job is basically just to investigate abuse and neglect of children. Oftentimes that involves, kids being exposed to domestic violence, parents that use and abuse drugs and alcohol. And it also, on the other end, targets or kind of deals with kids that are physically abused and sexually abused. And outside of that, I'm a UN representative for Pathways to Peace. I guess, kind of thinking about the pandemic and the last 2 years that we went through, it's tough, on everyone as an individual, but especially with the work that I do. During the pandemic, a lot of the agencies in the state I can speak of basically went through their own shutdown. But however, my job, because it deals so much with it's a very necessary role. So it's difficult to say, we're not going to continue investigating abuse and neglect, especially of children. But I did work throughout the pandemic, basically on a 24/7 schedule. And, as difficult as it was to deal with some of the cases, I really felt like I was able to make a difference in the lives that I touched and people that I came across, even if it was very minimal. You know, a lot of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis isn't easy, and the pandemic definitely doesn't help because, you know, there's so much more that goes on behind closed doors. And, you know, going into a almost like nationwide shutdown, that definitely didn't help. So that I could definitely feel the burden on my end because, you know, even though some of the cases at times the numbers were like less, in the long run, we don't necessarily know, and we might not know like what the true effects of the pandemic were until we get some statistics like years from now, you know. But I can definitely say that it's not easy on the kids that had to go through it, as well as the workers that had to kind of continue doing their work without being able to fully address everything or fully make the difference. But, you know, fast forward to 2 years, here we are. We're kind of starting a new normal. And I'm very big on quotes, so I kind of just want to close off by saying or sharing something with you guys. And it's something that I hold dear to me. It kind of like resonates with how I try to look at life after the pandemic. And it says, she took a deep breath and let go of the would have, should have, could have, and has been weighing her down. She smiled at how light she felt without them. So I think a lot of times, you know, it's easy to become overwhelmed. It's easy to, you know, I can speak for myself, take on so much and like want to kind of like check mark all the boxes that you kind of like sign up for. But it feels so much better to like let go of something that weighs you down and kind of, you know, makes things a little more difficult and makes it more of like a struggle for you. But if anyone has any questions, I'm sure we'll get to that towards the end, but I'm here for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your own experience with these kids. I think we often forget about how much the pandemic affected those who may have already been living in an abusive environment, or perhaps their environment became abusive because of the pandemic. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your work protecting these children. So I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Abby, if you could pin her.
Yes, I did.
Yes, thank you. Who, as we mentioned before, she works at the Lifelong Learning Institute at American University, and she has traveled all over helping and educating girls. So thank you.
So you're introducing me, right?
Yes.
So, okay, thank you. So my name is Kim Weichel, and I'm just happy to be here. Such an important topic. I'm passionate about girls' education. You know, the researchers, the economists say that the best education, the best form of investment in a community is investing in girls' education. Because there's this saying that says, if you educate a boy, you educate an individual. If you educate a girl, you educate a community or a nation. And in some ways, it's really true. But sadly, many girls have not been in school in parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Now, the Millennium Development Goals that the UN passed in the year 2000 had 8 goals, one of which was to ensure that primary school became not only widespread, but for all girls to be able to go to primary school. And that was largely accomplished by the year 2015. The subsequent goals are the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs from 2015 to 2030. Sadly, still, not all girls go to secondary school. I would say the vast majority do go to primary, but many don't go to secondary school for a range of issues that I thought I would just briefly describe. So one is, of course, poverty. Poverty plagues, and the poverty in Africa is different than kind of poverty we see in the US. In some cases, schools charge small fees, $2.50 a month, or require school uniforms, or require buying books. And this is beyond the reach of many poor families. And on top of that, you've got the issue of sexism, where if they have boys and girls, they will send the boys first, and the money for the school fees and the uniforms will go for the boys. And so these issues really are barriers for girls to be able to go to school. Another barrier is disease. Now, I think all of us in the US sort of take our health for granted. We all get vaccinated when we're young, but this COVID now has really raised our awareness of the absolute impact of disease. And yet, in Africa, Asia, and other countries, yellow fever, malaria, dengue fever, worms, and dysentery from unclean water. These are the kinds of things many people live with on an ongoing basis. COVID now was just yet another disease for them. So obviously, if you're ill, you're not going to be able to study and go to school. And so these are big issues, and certainly in parts of Africa. And COVID has really wiped out the gains that girls and girls' education has made in so many places, sadly. And we've seen some of that, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. Another issue, which is menstruation. We know that all girls will get their period during adolescence. And yet here in the US, we have good sanitation, we have clean bathrooms to go to in schools, and we've got pads, modest pads to take care of the issue. But that's not the case in many countries. They don't have access to pads. Some schools have outhouses. And so a lot of girls don't feel comfortable going to school when they have their periods. And so often you have them missing 5 days a month. And so this has been problematic. It's been talked a lot about how do we ensure proper sanitation, but also provide really low cost pads. So I'm on the board of several nonprofits, one of which is called Light My Fire, and we have supported a number of projects to develop reusable pads so that they're just pennies so that people can afford them and be able to clean them and reuse them. So again, this whole thing of menstruation is really a big one for girls in poor areas. Another is malnutrition. We all in the US, I'm sure, have a reasonably good diet. This isn't just about not eating junk food. It's about, do we have enough protein? And so for many girls, they live on rice or beans and no protein, sometimes one meal a day. And if you're really hungry, you're not going to be able to study. So malnutrition is another big issue. Another is electricity, something we take for granted in the US, that we have lights, that we have heat, but that we have computers, we have internet, we have Wi-Fi. And that's been really essential during the COVID online learning thing. Many rural villages either have shoddy or spotty electricity, but no internet, no Wi-Fi, and families can't afford computers. So a lot of times in cities, you've got libraries that'll have a couple of computers, and yet people have to line up to use these computers. They would have electricity, but if you're needing to study and you can't rely on getting access to a computer, how do you learn? So many kids have fallen behind during the COVID time when they couldn't go to schools. So again, electricity in the homes is definitely an issue. But what I want to address, and these are more difficult issues, but these definitely affect girls and we need to be aware of them. And they're all forms of violence against women. So the first is sex and labor trafficking. Sex and labor trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry and very difficult to curtail. It is prevalent in every country. It is obviously a human rights violation. It is criminal, not cultural. A lot of adolescent girls, if perhaps they come from a poor family, perhaps they're homeless, perhaps they're upset with their family and they've run away. These are the kind of girls that are preyed upon. And people in the sex industry will, prey upon these girls. They'll offer them gifts, they'll offer them shelter, they'll say they care for them and they love them. And then these girls who are needing love, needing food, needing clothing will become psychologically dependent on these people are called Johns, often, the people who groom them. And, before they know it, they're ensconced in the sex trafficking arena. It happens all the time. I've just read devastating article in yesterday's Washington Post that a lot of Ukrainian women who are fleeing Ukraine, husbands, the men can't leave Ukraine. A lot of women are now being trafficked because they've come alone. So this is affecting many, many adolescent girls. It's happening in the US. Labor trafficking is also challenging. And let me just give you one example. I live in the Washington, DC area, and I went to a talk where an embassy official in his home country said to his friend, a mom of an adolescent girl, I have a job for your daughter. If you allow her to come with me, I can put her to work and she can have access to America, which the mother thought was wonderful. So the mother said, do everything he tells you to do. This is what an opportunity for you. She goes. She's now working in the embassy. She has no passport. She doesn't speak English. She can't drive a car. She doesn't know anything about this country. And she's working 18 hours a day and not getting paid. And so this was an actual story. Somehow she eventually found her way out of that scenario. But these are the kind of things that are going on, and one just has to be aware of them because it certainly is widespread. They say around 21 million people are being trafficked worldwide at any one period of time. So it's enormous. I've seen figures of a $32 billion industry. So it's very, very lucrative. Another difficult issue is female genital mutilation, or FGM. This is like female circumcision in some ways. It is a surgery that is in the vagina area that is highly unhealthy, but it happens in 29 countries in Africa, Middle East. It has been sort of passed down for generation where grandmothers had it done, so they require their daughters, and now the mothers feel that their daughters. And so there's been a lot of education to stop FGM because it's highly discriminatory and it caused many health effects. Let me just read you a few of them. The procedures can result in devastating effects such as severe bleeding and problems urinating, cysts, infections, infertility, complications in childbirth, increased risk of newborn deaths, and so forth. And sometimes they need to have surgeries later in life. So FGM is really a very difficult and widespread practice and is highly discriminatory. So there's been a lot of education, but it still happens. And the other difficult area is child marriage. So it impacts around 14 million girls, again, happens in every country, where girls are married off at a young age, 11, 12, 14. The worst offender is India. And they say 47% of girls are married before the age of 18. What happens? They usually can't go to school. Usually it's an older man. They want sex. The girl falls pregnant at 11 or 12. Her body isn't ready for it. And so she takes on a life that is not a happy one and doesn't allow her to get educated. So child marriage is another huge issue and something that we all need to be aware of and work on to ensure girls can get to school. So I'll just say a couple projects I've worked on. It was a widespread project in East Africa to educate parents about the importance of sending their daughters to school. Again, it was more of a traditional thing that you send your boys but not your girls. And so through a massive outreach and education program, more girls started going to school in the East Africa area, as well as another incentive is when they have female teachers. In this country, probably most teachers are female, but then because the jobs were scarce and would firstly go to men, most teachers were male. So we really work to train more women to become teachers and to have female role models who are teachers. And they're also more sensitive when girls are having their period or not speaking up. And so it really helped to have more female teachers in schools. So that project, we trained a number of teachers and that really helped increase the percentage of girls that going to school. And I'll just say ending on a positive note, there are many wonderful examples. I just want to cite the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy in South Africa. I've personally spent a lot of time in South Africa, and it's a remarkable experience for these girls to get such great education from early through high school with focused attention, coaches, mentors, and so forth. So anyway, that just gives a little example of some of the work that I've done and I've seen that now there's much more awareness about the importance of sending girls to school.
Thank you so much. That was
Thank you so much.
very impactful. Thank you so much for sharing that all with us. I think I and everyone else here learned a lot. So now we are going to transition over to our panel speakers, which again has Kim, Tez, and
I'm
Mary.
them.
You got this, Abby?
Yep, I'm just trying to find them in the thing. Sorry. There we go.
The joys of Zoom.
Of course.
So essentially how this is going to work, we are going to ask a question and give you all the chance to answer it. We'll just go in the order you are on my screen: Kim, Tez, Mary. So all these questions come from students at the Global Leaders Institute. Essentially, we sent them a bit about our presentation and asked them to come up with questions to ask all of you and for what they thought was important to learn and to hear. So, Abby, if you'll read our first question.
Of course. What led you into your line of work, especially considering what awful things people do and the awful things you learn and say? And this was a question that I was actually allowed to write. Kimberly, can you start, please? Thank you.
Well, actually, I'm just wondering, maybe let's start with Tez since I just spoke. People might like to hear from my
Okay, that
friend
sounds
Tez
great. Tez.
I'm willing to do that. Thanks, Kim. So what led me into this work, given that there are awful things that we have to encounter? I remember, well, first of all, let me back up and say that from the time I was a young child, probably like others on this panel and you, Catherine and Abigail, I was a peace builder. That it was important to me to stand up for justice and to support people that I experienced as being victims of injustice. And I had a strong desire to create opportunities for people to come together in unity and harmony from as far back as I can remember. When I accepted the call to Pathways to Peace, I remember asking the creator, what do I need to know about this job? And the response back was how to do the work while having a broken heart. And so for me, the way that I manage the having to witness what I would call atrocities around our world is really by recognizing, first of all, that allowing myself to succumb to those would immobilize me and leave me feeling powerless. And then secondly, that keeping, as Mr. King said, keeping my eye on the prize, that I am here to create peace on earth. And so if I am immobilized by all of the things that are far less than peaceful, I lose my ability to affect change in the name of peace. And so do I walk around brokenhearted? Quite a bit of the time, yes. But I transcend that so that I can accomplish that vision of a world at peace. So I guess that's what I would say. leaving room for Kim and Mary.
Okay, thanks, Tez. So since I was a young girl, I just had an inner fascination with all things international. I loved looking at maps. I loved studying geography. I was just fascinated in costumes and tea ceremonies from Japan and anything I could learn. I don't know, there was just something calling me that was deep inside. I befriended exchange students at my high school. I wanted to become one. I did. And it just was known to me from an early stage I would be involved globally. But specifically, my peace building work started when my husband and I lived in South Africa during apartheid. This is the late 1970s, so I date myself here. And I could see the devastation of such a horrific regime that would discriminate the majority of the population. And I just knew since the day we arrived that I would need to be involved in working to build a post-apartheid society, which is what my work was. But I'll say specifically, amongst many things, I worked in a large squatter community on the outskirts of Cape Town because so many Africans didn't have homes. They lived in squatter camps. And I worked with remarkable women who were not only working, but they were taking care of their community, despite living in shacks. Often without electricity. And I just could see the wisdom, the sharing, the leadership, the importance of women taking action. And it just ignited my passion. And I knew that both I'd be involved in peace building, but specifically working with women who are always at the core of our community. So I think that was the beginning of my actual real dedication to saying, I want to do everything I can to ensure these kinds of systems don't happen again and ensure that women stay in leadership.
Thank you so much for that, Mary.
Okay, so my journey to social work has been like a weird one. I started off in education and I'm actually thinking about going back to education, but my social work background's going to help me in education. I'm just reminding myself that. But I have always known ever since I was a little girl that I wanted to help people. Like during cleanup time during preschool, like I would always be like, if you need help, like I'll come help you. Like I just have always been the one to be be like, hey, here's my hands, take them, I'll help you. And I never knew social work existed until one day I was sitting in the student activities office at my university, and one of my friends was like, I'm switching my major to social work. And I was like, what's social work? And she explained it to me, and I was like, I think I want to be a social worker. And so I talked to the head of the social work department, and she was like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're like meant to be a social worker. Like you're meant to help people. And the way I knew I wanted to help children was that I myself am a child at heart. I like am so like I can relate to them in a way that they are comfortable with me, like they can confide in me. And I've at my internship right now, I've had so many experiences where the kids have told me like, I don't want you to leave in May, like I can't, what's gonna happen after May? And I'm like, you will be okay. Like I just the only way I know how to put it into words is I am one with them. They can see themselves in me. Like this one little girl, she always says like, I want to be you when I grow up. And like that like warms my heart. And I'm like, I see myself as her. So the way I came into social work was just knowing that I want to help people. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. The next question is actually mine because that's the order, I guess. How have you seen the domestic burden change over generations? Obviously, we see as new generations come up, more and more women are getting educated and we're progressing as a society. Main thing for us was making sure to present an intergenerational approach. So can you tell us in your own experience, how has it changed from your grandmother's mothers to yourselves and your possible for marry children?
I guess I can begin. I think it's my turn again. Well, I'm fascinated by the term domestic burden because it is a part of my own history in the resurgence of the feminist movement in the 70s and early 80s. And in that movement, it was really all about women's work being recognized, especially in the home, domestic, that women's work would be valued the same as working outside of the home, that taking care of a home and raising children was as important as any job one could do outside of the home. And that we even came up with monetary scales for how much that work was worth. And because historically, it's an issue of inequity for women, that if they stayed home and took care of the home, that was just what they were supposed to do. It didn't have value, as all of you have talked about earlier. And so, that movement began with pay equity and valuing women's work. And so it also recognized that these traditional roles were embedded in the culture, as you said earlier. And the only additional piece I would say is that the role of Black women as domestic workers in white homes was brought to light. And for me personally, my mother grew up in the Deep South, and she had, her mother died when she was 12, and she was raised by a Black nanny. That was her mother. And yet that Black nanny was not valued as equal to any other white women in the household or white women who are parenting children, and often to the sacrifice of their own children. So I think just recognizing that these roles are just very embedded in our culture. The only thing I want to add from a question earlier, just to get it on the table, is that we know that the effects of the pandemic were devastating for so many, not only because of loss of life, but the increases, as we've heard, in child abuse, domestic violence, people who are literally trapped in their homes, the loss of learning, greater levels of child poverty. And so we know that. And yet there has been kind of a rebalancing in some ways that has come through the pandemic. And so I have recognized that the value of women's work has been more recognized. We even have reports of more men playing a role when both the men and women were in the house doing their work, that men had to step up and do more of the childcare, more of the household chores. I think that the service workers who are the lowest paid, all of a sudden we now know that they were keeping everything going. And so those waiters, those waitresses, those folks who clean our facilities, we're now recognizing that they are more valuable and need to be paid more. And that's so true with our childcare workers, that we are valuing to a greater degree our teachers because we've missed that learning, and our healthcare workers who are taking care of our sick and our dying. And so there is also this balancing effect that has come out of the pandemic. And so given I'm always a hopeful person, I wanted to put those pieces onto the table as well. And I'll pass.
So I guess I'm next. I think it's maybe hard for many of you in high school now to really appreciate that even into the 1950s, that wasn't that long ago, women really didn't work. Their options were so few. They could be maybe a secretary, a nurse, and a teacher. Those were at most the three professions. Women were usually discouraged from working. They were expected to have the perfect home and the beautiful meal and raise the kids. It was just, as Tez rightly points out, it was part of the culture. But there were many other things. Women couldn't get a credit card without their husband's signature. Women couldn't go to many universities. Women weren't expected to be a lawyer or any surgeon or a doctor. Those options weren't available. There weren't role models. It's really probably hard to say. And having been born in 1951, I've seen it. My grandmothers didn't work because that wasn't the time. My mother bucked the system a bit. She was a professional pianist. She would rehearse during the day. When my father would drive home with our one car at around 6, she would give him a kiss in the driveway and take the car out and go perform at restaurants and piano bars at night. That was her job, but she didn't do it during the day, but she still did what she loved. So she was my role model of doing your avocation and your vocation, but she had to arrange it to ensure she was home during the day because they didn't have daycare in those days. So much has changed over time as our culture has changed, but I think now, certainly in the last decades, the economy means that both people have to work. The two parents have to work to be able to afford to live in many cities these days. So if you have two parents working full time with kids, you have to figure out how to divide the work at home. And it's still mostly on the women's shoulders. Even when I was a young mom, if our son was ill at school, I would get the call at work. Your son is ill, pick him up. They didn't call my husband, they called me. And so, these are the kinds of ingrained things, and this is what women are working on. And I think younger people really are now, demanding it. And the research shows that both parents, whether it's two women, two men, a man and a woman, really need to be involved in the children's life. That is what's healthiest for them. We know this. As well as just not feasible for the woman to do all the cooking, shopping, laundry, and work full time. So something has to give. And I think during the pandemic, since many people have been home, there probably has been a much greater division of these things since they're right in front of them. The question I have is what's going to happen as both people go back into the workforce. And let's say the man works a little longer hours, will he now expect his wife to do all that had been done previously? It's really a societal issue. We have a lot of deeply sexist issues in our culture that need changing. It's hard for women to go into politics because those are long hours. And I even caught myself, I have to admit, when Kirsten Gillibrand was running for president, I knew she had young children. I said to myself, well, how can she do this and take care of her young children? Would I ask that of a man? Probably not. So I have to catch myself in that we have to ensure we have the daycare, we have the support system so women can go into leadership. A lot has changed, but we still have a ways to go.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, as a high schooler, I realized it was only 70 years ago or something, but that still feels so long ago to me. But we're still dealing with it so much today. As you just said, I'm someone who's interested in going into politics, and I've mentioned that to a couple of the adults in my life, and I always get well, what about your kids? And I'm 15. Why are you asking me about my kids? I just find it, even now with all the progress we've made, that's still the go-to for women. Well, what about your families? So just thank you so much for saying that, Mary.
Sorry, before Mary speaks, I'd also like to say something, as that's something as I've been told as well, is I'm someone who at this point I've decided that I don't want kids. I'll possibly adopt, I'm not really sure, but I don't want my own biological children. The amount of looks I've gotten from my family members of, are you sure that's what you really want? What will your husband want? Like, because much of my family is not college educated, and they are the ones taking care of their families. And they think that that's the only path for a daughter. And yeah, now Mary, you can speak. Sorry, thank you.
First off, more power to you. I am very proud that even at the age of 15 that you know that that's something that you want. So kudos to you. So for myself, like I said before, my mom is disabled, and I never got to meet my mother's mom, unfortunately, but my grandmother, she worked for my dad's and my grandfather's plumbing business, and she was a secretary. So as I said earlier, that was like one of the only jobs that you could really get years ago. But I'm gonna refer to two parents that I know very well. The dad, stay-home dad, and the mother is a veterinarian. And it just shows how much that time has changed, because 50 years ago you never would have heard of a stay-home dad. That was a ridiculous concept to hear. He has two young kids, and he is choosing that because he knows that his wife wants to save animals and work some crazy hours, and he is choosing to be home so that the kids aren't home like with the nanny or something. And I just love that is something that has come to be. And because even I'm a big TV show person, and I watch This Is Us, and that on that show, even though it's just like he's an actor, one of the guys, Kevin, he plays a Manny on a TV show, which is like a male nanny, which yes, they are poking fun of it at times, but it's still something that you never would have heard of. I like the idea of gender bending, like stereotypical roles, because a man can be a nanny. It's just something that I like to see and wish to see more often, honestly. But that's all I got.
Thank you so much. And it's so important to see in media that bending of traditional roles, men being housewives, house husbands, women going and working those long hours. We see how media affects the way we view our world. And hopefully with media showing more diversity of jobs and frankly, anything that can help us in the long term. The next question comes from Mia Rodriguez, who is actually on the board of Pathways to Peace. With everyone staying home and people participating in domestic labor more, do you think this pandemic will change how we view domestic labor? And if so, what changes do you believe will be made as a result? So I'll hand it off to Taz.
I dealt with that a little bit, and I can come back, but I think we should switch it up and have Mary go next.
Cool.
All right.
I was gonna offer, and then they said you. So for me, I want to say I think it will change how people view it, but unfortunately I don't, because people, especially I'm 23 years old, so I'm in that awkward, like, not Gen Z and not millennial age group. So anything like above millennial, people are a lot of, especially like older men, they are very like stern on what they are thinking, and I don't see them changing, like, oh well, this was just a pandemic, like it's not going, everything's going to go back to normal now, when realistically nothing's going back to normal. Things may feel like it's going back to normal, but it's not. We have to adjust, and this is something that I think we need to adjust to, because especially with women, like nursing and doctors and like the medical field in general, just becoming very more prominent, people working very longer hours. I truly believe that labor force, people are gonna need to realize, like, okay, this is something that we need to become accustomed to. I hope that makes sense. That's all. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Should I go next, or Tez, did you want to? Okay, so, I really worry what's going to happen as things open up with the economy. Many women have had to leave the workforce. Many women, many more women than men. They've lost their job because they were low in the totem pole. They had to give up their job because their kids are learning at home online, and they couldn't do both. And for many reasons, many women are not working. And so what's going to happen now? Will companies hire back at the same rate? Will companies hire at 29 hours a week because at 30 they have to pay benefits? And what is going to happen to maybe some gains in the household where both partners are sharing in domestic responsibilities? Will that go back if, let's say, the woman can't find work? The husband's working and he's going to, okay, now you're home, you can do why should I have to do anything? So I have a lot of wonderings what's going to happen. I hope that, through everybody being at home, there's been a lot of good dialogue about the importance of sharing all the responsibilities, that wouldn't change, but I'm afraid it would. It still always seems to fall on the women's shoulders. I always find it annoying when men say, well, I babysit. Like, it's not babysitting, your kids. And so it's a sharing in responsibility, and having men learn to cook. And, many men are great cooks, but, and there's not the assumption that these are all women's responsibilities. As long as those cultural assumptions and stereotypes are there, we're not going to be able to do the top leadership positions. So these are deeply embedded in our society, and hopefully all you younger folks will do a better job than our generation did in training all people in society the importance of sharing for the sake of the kids and the well-being of the family.
Thank you so much. Tez?
So I think I do know that it will be a new normal. We will not go back to where we were at before the pandemic. I think the verdict is somewhat out as to whether that will be better for women, or once again that women will carry that burden. I find some hope. I mentioned this before, but it's going to be, the economy is going to push much of the change. And so in that way, I think, and I mentioned that we are going to have to pay higher wages for some traditional women's work: teachers, healthcare workers, childcare workers, and it's already happening. Waitresses, those roles that kind of keep our economy moving, and also keep us educated and healthy, which is what we need to be as a citizenry. That there are shortages as women are reconsidering whether it's worthwhile. And I know this is a privileged set of women, but they're making choices about what kind of work they'd like to do, given the wages were the lowest wages in those core women's. And it's no surprise, we've undervalued women, so we've undervalued the traditional opportunities for employment of women, as well as children, care of our children. But now we're finding that all of those professions, because they're needed to keep the economy going, all of those professions are having to pay more to be able to get workers to care for our needs. And so I don't know how it will change, but again, I remain hopeful that there is some rebalancing occurring that will drive economics, which could lift women out of poverty. And I think those economic drivers are going to be prominent in the new normal that has been created because of the pandemic. And by the way, as a result of climate change, as a result of needing to deal with racism. All of those are drivers of this new normal, in addition to what we've been talking about here. So
I'd like to just add one comment if I could, and that is, this whole pandemic has pointed out the absolute importance of a national family leave policy and a national sick leave policy, for heaven's sakes. The idea that people go to work sick and maybe have COVID because they don't have a way to support themselves, and they lose their job. I mean, it's craziness. We're the only industrialized nation that does not have a family leave policy. And so the pandemic has pointed out a lot of weak links in our society, and these must change. But women need to have sick leave. If you have a child sick at home, again, it's usually the woman's responsibility to stay home from work. And if she doesn't have sick leave, how can she afford to do that? It's crazy. So let's hope we learn from these, our errors.
Marlena's?
Yes, I also wanted to chime in. I think even though there was a lot of like setbacks with the pandemic and during COVID-19, I definitely think that it affords us an opportunity to move forward and to create that new normal, like the others mentioned. And I'm very big on like women empowerment. So I think this is the perfect platform for that, because, we can empower women to, go out there and, go chase after the careers that they want and get the things that they want in life. And I think that's something that we can start to promote as early as, they're like a girl's age, at a very young age. I think for me, the only hope that I have with all of this, because I do understand that more women do have to work, is I'm hoping that, women are able to earn a fair share of what they deserve. I think in a lot of places we still have the issue of men making more money than women, even though they have the same roles, they have the same position, and they're in the same, let's say, agency or career role. So I think my hope is that, aside from empowering girls and women to continue to move forward for themselves, it's also that, they're compensated for their time and for the skills that they have. And I think with the pandemic also, it also provides the opportunity for, I think it was mentioned earlier, for the roles to be shared and the responsibilities to be shared at home, especially when it comes to caring for a child. I don't think it's fair that women have to be the only ones losing sleep at night because a man has to work, when, many times that woman also has to work the next day. So I think sharing the responsibility of domestic work and just being a parent in general is definitely very necessary.
Yes, thank you so much. So our next question is from Daniela Borges. Due to the restricted access to conception, it is estimated that the pandemic will lead to 1 million unplanned pregnancies, the majority of which will occur to low and middle income women. This will likely cause many women to have to place their education and their careers on hold to help raise their children. How can we help these women, and how can we help make contraceptive more available? So we'll start with Mary again.
So I think that one thing that has to do with the whole like contraceptive aspect of it is people need to realize, to get over there's a lot of people out there that think when they think of Planned Parenthood, they only think of abortions. They don't think of everything else that Planned Parenthood has to offer. And Planned Parenthood is one of the most affordable for a lot of people out there. And there's so many people that when they go to Planned Parenthood, they are like, oh no, like this is the abortion clinic. Like I can't do it. Like they don't think that they do STD testing. They do they give out pregnancy tests. They do so many other amazing things. And while there might not be a Planned Parenthood everywhere in America, but there is a lot. And I think that if people get over that, it will help. And another thing is universal health care, because if we have a universal health care plan, so many problems in general will be solved, but that alone would be a great stepping stone, because there's so many people that can't afford insurance and go months without going to the doctor, and especially those who may come from low income families. They might not be able to afford insurance, and if they do get pregnant, they might not have the right funds to get the proper care for their child. So universal health care would definitely be so beneficial for it.
Okay, I'll follow that. Absolutely. We have to make contraceptives much more available and accessible. But in addition, we need to have sex education. People have to understand at a young age. And here's the problem. More and more conservative parents in many states in this country are now thinking they can scrutinize the books their kids read, the curriculum the teachers teach, and anything to do with race or sex is now deemed way too controversial. Well, how do their kids learn about sex education? I mean, this is very important. A lot of girls don't, to be honest with you, young girls don't quite understand maybe that sex can lead to pregnancy. There's a lot of basic material that needs to be understood and what their options are. Unfortunately, again, it always falls on the girl. Hello, it takes two people to get pregnant. So why is it always just on the girl's responsibility? But I think education is key. Now, I'm a member of a large Unitarian church, and the Unitarians have what's called Our Whole Life. It's in the 8th grade, and it is sex education. It is a year-long program. It is almost everything kids need to know, but how many kids would have access to that if they don't get it in schools? How many parents, conservative parents, are going to talk to their kids about sex education? So there's so much misunderstanding. Kids get stuff from online. We know this. That's not always the accurate information. So I'd say more access to contraceptives and much more access to good education.
If I can just comment on what Kimberly said, I have gone to a Catholic school since kindergarten, so I have received no formal sex education. And what I've learned, how I originally learned, was from students my age, so think 10, 11-year-olds, and the internet, which I have actually researched things now that I'm older, but it terrifies me, children learning sex ed from the internet, because it's streams of misinformation, and also what they can find on the internet. I don't think I have to say that for you to understand. What they can find on the internet. It is so important to teach sex education, and really we see when sex education is taught, abortions go down, birth control needs, they can go down, because girls especially know what may happen. So thank you so much for working also to educate us, because we really need it.
I'd also like to say something as well. I went to public school all the way up until 8th grade. We were taught the bare minimum of what we needed to know. And then so I was in sex ed during the 3rd quarter, which was when COVID started. So once we were in 3rd quarter for about 3 weeks, and then we were out of school. That's all I got, was those 3 weeks. Most people got 7, I think the quarters were 7 weeks, which is still, I don't think, is enough for an 8th grader. And like you said, Kimberly, with the It Takes Two, why are there shows 16 and Pregnant where it's just the mom, where they're blaming the moms, not the dads, where in some cases the moms possibly didn't do anything, in cases of rape and possibly incest as well. And that's stuff that we need to be educated on, and to make sure that the blame isn't placed on the girls, because with that blame being placed, that can end a girl's career and her future.
Yep, it's an enormous burden and responsibility.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass it off to Tez now.
So yes, 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 all of the above. The only thing I would add is that, and we could do a whole day on this topic alone, is that what happens with sex education, what happens with girls carrying the responsibility to not get pregnant, what happens with women having to bear responsibility for the babies that are born. All of this is rooted in the historic sexism and the taboos around sexuality. And so women's bodies are still in many countries, there's a belief that women's bodies are dirty, that women's bodies are not sacred, that women's bodies should be covered up, and that we should be ashamed of our bodies. All of the cultural media images that show beautiful airbrushed photos of beautiful, very thin people, that doesn't look anything like what real women's bodies, real girls' bodies look like. And so again, making those connections would take for the rest of this day, but I think you know it. And that it goes back to the historic sexism that we experience, along with all those other isms, racism and others, here in the US culture, but also globally as well. So enough said.
Thank you, Marlenis. If you'd like
Yes, thank you. So I agree with what everyone has mentioned before. I think definitely advocating for contraceptives to be more available is important. But the only other piece that I want to add, aside from us needing some sort of like universal healthcare so that, you know, women and girls do have access to that, is the fact that a lot of these difficult conversations have to start at home. You know, I think a lot of times we rely on schools and education to kind of provide that information. And I see a lot of, I guess, lack of education when it comes to having these discussions within the field that I do. You know, people a lot of times aren't necessarily speaking to their children about, you know, these are your body parts, and this is what should and shouldn't be acceptable or accepted, you know, as a young girl, as a, you know, entering womanhood and all of that. But I think that, you know, as a parent, as an aunt, as an uncle, we all have the responsibility to have the difficult conversations, you know, like let's talk about our body parts. Let's talk about what should and shouldn't be done. Let's talk about, you know, not so much the birds and the bees talk, but what are like, let's really get down to, let's break down the birds and the bees talk. Let's talk about contraceptives at home so that girls and just everyone is educated and is able to attain the resources a little bit better. As it was mentioned earlier, I think, you know, looking back to when I was in school and just growing up myself, my parents never really addressed much of anything. And I had to learn, you know, about sex education and all of that in school or friends and, you know, eventually on the internet. And I think in a sense that's a disservice to us because, you know, for a lot of people, I think if you've been through something, why not share that little bit of knowledge or information with someone and hopefully, you know, help them from either like making a mistake or, you know, giving them the tools that they need so that they can kind of continue moving forward along the journey.
All right. Thank you,
It's
Marlenis.
it's another yes, I so agree. And I would just add one or two lines, and that is the best, and I know, Marlenis, you know this because this is your work, the best sexual abuse prevention, the best pregnancy prevention is to start when children are very young, to honor and celebrate their bodies, especially girls, that their bodies are not something to be ashamed of, that how they treat their bodies as they're growing is nothing to be ashamed of, and that they are celebrated in their wholeness, including their bodies and their sexuality from a very young age. Those are the young girls who will grow up to believe that they are worthy of being treated with respect, and that they wouldn't allow themselves, or they would at least stand up to any aggression against them. And so it's a part of empowerment that we embrace the opportunity to give our children not only the, as Marlena said, the knowledge of their healthy body parts, but that they are healthy in all ways, including their bodies and their sexuality, age appropriately.
Of course. And for our next question is from Linsadora. And the question is, due to the pandemic's lack of job opportunities, we've witnessed an increase in women turning to the adult industry as a last resort as a source of income. How can we assist in the education of other women who might not have the resources to learn about safe sex? And if there is any way that we can provide them with the resources that they need. And Mary, would you like to start?
Yeah. I don't think that last resort should be the proper word, because there are some people out there that really enjoy what they do, and it honestly, like, it helps pay the bills. And I think that if we get rid of the stigma of, oh no, like, don't go down that street, like that's where some prostitutes are, like that like, and with everything there comes a stigma. And if we get rid of the stigma of people having to be ashamed of what they do, like within the sex industry, then I feel like it will become more safely, because that if people have to do it in hiding, then they're gonna maybe not do it safely. And when they don't do it safely, that's when you can get hurt, you can get STDs, you can have unplanned pregnancies. There's a list of things that can happen. But if once you get rid of the stigma and the factor that you should be ashamed of what you're doing, you should own it. You should be proud of your body. You should be proud of everything that you're doing. And if you're ashamed of it, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
As much as you, Mary, I agree with you so much. We need to end the stigma about sex work and work to help empower these women. I do want to add the context that the young woman who is asking this question does do a lot of research into sex work. That's something she is passionate about. And while she does care about it and obviously wants to help empower these women, she's also done a lot of research into women and girls who feel as though they are forced to go into that industry and might not necessarily want to. So that's kind of the context of the question. I feel like that wasn't maybe portrayed as well with that writing, but
yeah, sorry about that.
No, you've hit on one of the remaining controversies in our culture right now. I have a lot of experience in this topic, given I'm the mom of the sexual assault movement in Minnesota, which is where I live. And I currently work in my consulting practice with organizations who work with survivors of prostitution and sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. And this is really a controversial topic right now, with some on one side of the fence saying that our sex workers deserve protections, so that they can do their work safely. They are just wage earners like everyone else, and they're in a risky business, so they deserve some extra protections around healthcare and other things like that. And then on the other side, there is, and by the way, both are true. Both are true. On the other side, we have organizations that really are helping women escape the trap of prostitution and systematic sexual abuse. And they truly are victims. And so right now, both of those sides of this controversial issue are correct, and it's just like so many other things in our culture today. We so want to take one side or the other without looking at what the individual really needs and how they define themselves. And so I think that's the important piece, is that we allow women to define their own experience of who they are without judgment. So.
And I'll just add, from what everything has been said, that to me, education is always the answer. If girls are given a strong education, they probably, I can't imagine, to be honest, I don't know if any of you would say, well, I aspire to be a sex worker. I mean, the more education you have, you see the range of options. I'd say sex work might be a backup if, somebody's desperate, doesn't have many skills. I think girls that are educated see options, they see the role models of what other women are doing, they're given support. So education is always the key too. So, it really should be her choice. But typically it's not a first choice or a second choice. It's probably if somebody's desperate, and that's what we don't want. We don't want desperation, we want options.
I do want to just add in there, I have a good friend, she is 14, who she actually wants to own her own club, and she wants to do that partly because she's very passionate about sex work, and she wants to create a safe environment for girls to work and be treated fairly. So I wonder if that's just a different perspective thing, or if she's just an outlier. But I think that really emphasizes where it really depends on who the woman is and what they want to do. But thank you for that. Marlena's?
I agree with what's been said, especially with Kim talking about education. And I sometimes, not too often, but I think before, when I had initially started working in the field, I had clients that was the only way of them putting a plate of food on the table for their kids. So, I think it's one of those things where stigma should be broken, because, just like we have people that do other jobs, like plumbers and jobs that we don't want to do to get our hands dirty, sometimes this is the only route that a person can take, being a sex worker, so that they can put a roof over their child's head and provide food on a daily basis. So I think education is important all around, so that maybe they could make better choices in life. But, sometimes those are the cards that they're dealt with, and what they the only thing that they can do, the only route that they can.
Thank you. And that is going to be our last question. Before we close off, I do want to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions. Okay. I just want to ask our speakers if they.
Oh, we do have a question.
You can unmute then.
Yeah, it's just I'm kind of hearing how this conversation is going, and like this year specifically, 2022, there were a lot of documentaries released on some of the biggest predators, and it's been so flooring and uncomfortable, and it's like true crimes, intriguing, but it's legitimately sickening how they go down into the details, and it's allegations. I guess I got to say that just to have a neutral sense of it. But the main thing is that I do actively worry about sex work and human trafficking, labor trafficking, and how these can be resolved specifically so people can put food on the table and make proper levels of planning and securities from it. But I think from the both sides of, hey, we got to protect these women, we got to have good governance, and hey, we got to make sure that women aren't in these vulnerable situations. People, individuals are in this vulnerable situation, and they're protected. I think on both sides, it's like we cannot just like act like we're allowing the current system in place, because what's clear is that, and I'll even throw the names out, which is like the Bill Cosbys and the Hugh Hefners of people, they kept making friends into cultures, into this reward system that specifically tainted the cognitive approaches of career paths and opportunities for all these women, which then made us like perpetuity of improper cultures. So in order for these like sex work businesses to then ally with these organizations who will definitely try to look out for them, to then ally with these social support systems, which includes religious places. Like how can a mosque, because I'm Muslim, be protective of sex workers, enable their privacy, and be pro women, LGBTQ plus? How can all that happen while keeping the level of guidance to be flexible enough? Stuff like that. I could. Oh, I'm taking so much time. But stuff like that, I'm so worried about it that I think the main conclusion should be that an entire root part of it has to be destroyed. I know it's a little too combative of a statement, but we have to kind of take that seriously to not continue this trend of trafficking, as I'm on the side of kind of a negative tone on it.
Okay, thank you for that.
I didn't mean to rush you. What you were saying was very eloquent. So
I have to
thank
agree
you
with
for
Tez.
that.
That was
I
very
so
good. Thank you.
agree.
So thank you for all of that. I do just, if any of our speakers would like to say anything before we close, because
There is a meeting right after us, so we do need to wrap up so they can start going.
Can I just say one final comment? I'll be brief.
Yes, of
So I
course.
just want to speak to a question that you sent us but didn't actually ask, and it was from a boy asking how can he support girls? That's such an important question, because if in your classroom, the boys are called on first before the girls, speak up. If you see discrimination in any way in the school, speak up. If your sisters are given more chores at home than you, as difficult as that might be, speak up. I think we need to partner. We need men and boys as champions. This is always a women's issue. Women need to speak, women need to take the burden. No, it should be a partnership. And we need men's voices and boys' voices, particularly, because that's the only way things are going to change.
so thank you so
Thank you
much.
for that, Kim.
I want to say thank you to everyone who came and who participated, and especially thank you so much to our speakers. You all, again, I need a better word, but you all were fantastic, and just thank you so much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed and were able to learn something, and I hope you guys will stay for the advocacy training that is next, and that we will see you at another event in the future.
I also want to say thank you to Tez, who is the reason that we are able to have this event tonight. And I also want to say thank you to Mr. Anthony, who is our amazing teacher, and who, without him, the two of us would never have gotten this far. And hopefully we'll be here next year.
Yes. So.
And I want to just say congratulations, Abigail and Catherine. They totally put this event together, led it, developed it, invited the speakers. And so it's to your credit that this occurred. You're just amazing. And I'm so excited to be able to watch your evolution as peace leaders.
Thank
you are
Thank you
today,
so much.
and you're just going to grow even more. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great program. Thank you very much for organizing it.
Of course. And with that, we will be letting
Transition.
everyone go as they need to start the advocacy training.
Thank you so much for organizing this event. That was
Thank
really
you. Have a
good.
nice night.
Have a nice night. Bye, everyone.
All right.